Evening, class of COVID-19. Today we're going to be going over paragraphs 123 through probably close to 130. We might not get that far. And so before I start, we're going to I want to make a collective decision as to how we spend the rest of our time in class. I want to know which issues you want to cover, whether or not you want to maybe keep going through this book or this work, or if you want to go over something different. I'd like to go through the issue of euthanasia, and maybe some others. Let's see which ones. Also, discrimination, racism. And perhaps abortion. So I want you to email me saying what you want to cover within basically the last month of class, and we can see if we can make that happen. Again, I want to leave this decision to you. I could just decide, but I want to cover things that you want to learn about, but I definitely do want to cover euthanasia. And so I'll leave the rest up to you. Okay, so please email me or post on Google Classroom, what maybe like 3 or 4 subjects do you want to cover from here on out. All right, so we're beginning on slide 116. Without objective truth or sound principles other than the satisfaction of our own desires and immediate needs, what limits can be placed on human trafficking, organized crime, the drug trade, commerce in blood diamonds, and the fur of endangered species? So first of all, watch Blood Diamond. I think it's on Netflix. It's really good. Very well done. I think it's a fantastic movie. But this paragraph is essentially saying, like, if we don't encounter, or if we don't understand that there is objective truth, which actually places limits on the ways we can act and the ways we can kind of live out our lives. It's like basically saying that reality places limits on things that we can do and things that we can't. And so if we don't have any sound principles, if we don't take note or acknowledge that there is objective truth, then what limits can we place on things like human trafficking, organized crime, drug trade, and so on and so forth? What's to stop us from just diving in headfirst into that stuff? But Papa continues, is it not the same relativistic logic which justifies the buying of organs of the poor for resale or use in experimentation, or eliminating children because they are not what their parents wanted? This same use and throwaway logic generates so much waste because of the disordered desire to consume more than what is really necessary. Now, I don't know anything about selling the organs of the poor and buying the organs of the poor. I don't know anything about that, but that sounds pretty messed up. I mean, all of it's messed up, but not to mention eliminating children because they're not what their parents wanted. What? But I mean, we are... How do I want to put this? Clean canteen. we are starting to kind of dabble in things that are kind of eugenics. At least they seem similar. I haven't really thought much about them or much about the issue, so I will struggle to make the distinction at this point in time. But I know that there are some, like if you have a predisposition to some kind of disease, they can like take that gene out or something in the conception process somehow. I really don't know. Now that seems to be a good thing, but I'm a little leery about it, just because of the amount of control that we're trying to have. But again, I mean, I think that's a tough one. It's not like, that's definitely not the same as choosing your child's eye color or height or whatever, because we're talking about a disease, like of trying to be immune to a certain disease that normally you would be predisposed to. So they're definitely not the same, but what I'm leery of is like, well, what's to stop us from just making that leap? It's like if you open up that door, where does that go to? But this actually touches on, this paragraph touches on, excuse me, one of the questions that one of you had. It was about how Papa says that everything in life is connected, like nature, poor, human embryo, person with disabilities. And when we fail to acknowledge these things, it becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. And so how is it all connected? Well, one way it's connected, well, first of all, I mean, the same, at least for human beings, I mean, we have the same nature. Okay, so it's like we're the same life form, we're the same species. So I think those are all pretty clearly connected. But when it comes to nature itself, well, here's probably one of the better ways I can explain it. So that, and I touch on this, or this is an issue that I argued in my thesis as well, that a particular way of thinking and acting, or what Marty would refer to as a comportment, will manifest itself or will show itself like in a variety of different ways. So like, let's say someone is just an angry person. Okay, well, if this person is showing anger towards one group of people, well, it kind of stands, what's that phrase I'm looking for? Stands to reason that before long they're going to be showing, or him or her is going to be showing, he or she, sorry, is going to be showing anger towards other groups of people. It's like, the way that serial killers, when they're kids, before they're actually serial killers, like they'll mutilate animals and stuff. And so it's like one way of thinking is going to show itself in different areas, or one way of acting. And that's what he means by like that same relativistic logic. Okay, so one might just be buying organs of the poor. Jeez, that is just so ridiculous. For resale or use or experimentation. But then that same kind of thinking is also evident in eliminating children because they're not what their parents wanted. And you find that same kind of thinking with the thought of just use and throw away. The way it generates a lot of waste and constantly consuming. So basically Papa is saying that it's the same relativistic logic that is behind abortion, blood diamonds, human trafficking, organized crime, drug trade. Next slide. We cannot think that mere political efforts and force of law will be enough to prevent these horrendous atrocities. Now, why would that be? Well, wanting to solve these problems by putting it all on the government, in other words, enforcing it by law, at least in my opinion, is immature because it deflects all the responsibility, all the personal responsibility onto the government. Murder is against the law, yet people are still murdered every day. So my point is that it's not wrong to work towards creating better policies and laws, but instead doing so will never be enough if we don't take responsibility for our own actions, for our families, for our communities, etc. And this could be controversial, but I don't know. I remember after one of the school shootings, I think it was the one in Florida that happened on Ash Wednesday. I heard an interview with one of the kids who said that they used to joke around saying, like, if somebody shot up the school, it would be this kid. And this kid actually ended up shooting up the school. And it's like, yeah, we can talk about better policies and laws regarding firearms, but what does it say about a community that just simply makes a kind of jokes around about, okay, someone is messed up, and if school is going to get shot up, it's probably going to be this person who does it. And then no one actually goes to help that person or to befriend them in some way. It just, again, I'm not really trying to put forth like a political opinion here regarding firearms. I'm just pointing out that it's like clearly things could have been done. I'll just put it like the way I understand it, or the way I would apply it to myself. Like if I was at that school and was a student and that happened, I know I would at least in part blame myself for it, because I didn't reach out to that person who, yeah, maybe they seemed odd or whatever, but for not befriending that person, for not trying to help in some way. And then also there's what Papa says, points out, because when the culture itself is corrupt and objective truth and universally valid principles are no longer upheld, then laws can only be seen as arbitrary impositions or obstacles to be avoided. Now, this actually, I think this whole thing actually applies to a lot of your questions, because a lot of them are kind of framed in this way. How do we actually change the minds of people regarding this? How do we actually get more people to care for the environment? Well, it starts with yourself. You have to take up the responsibility that you have, and it doesn't matter if no one else is doing it. That's your responsibility to do, and it's not necessarily your responsibility to kind of force others, but to at least show them that it can be done and perhaps inspire them and encourage them to do so. So it all starts with you and me. It's not, I think that's probably the best way to do it, to go about it, is by personal action. Okay, next slide. So perhaps you think Papa's getting a bit carried away here with no objective truth, no universally valid principles. Well, let's consider the following. So next slide. So here you see an article titled, Boys Can Have Periods Too. Children to be taught in latest victory for transgender campaigners. Like, yes, that's real. South Park didn't make it up. And on the next slide, you're actually going to see a picture of Stan. But yeah, so, or you can look up on YouTube, there's a debate that took place on a public TV program in Toronto where a college professor actually said that there's no such thing as biological sex. And I mean, if you challenge such positions, you will be labeled by a very small but very loud minority as a promoter of hate speech or alt-right transphobic bigot instead of a student of biology. And my favorite remark that was posted in the comment section of that video was it listed the time, I think, where this guy was saying it. And then it says, at no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. That's from Billy Madison. Okay, yeah, next slide, there's Stan. All right, next slide, the need to protect employment. Paragraph 124. Developing the created world in a prudent way is the best way of caring for it, as this means that we ourselves become the instrument used by God to bring out the potential which He Himself inscribed in things. Now, why do you think that developing the created world would be or doing so in a prudent way would be the best way of caring for it? First, think about or remember what we said about techne, about how, if you want to develop something, that means you have to have like a close involvement with it. So techne is implied in that because to develop something, you must work with it and gain a great familiarity with it. Second, think about the involvement that is necessary here. Like according to Heidegger, an everyday involvement is the key to opening up the full meaning of something. And by involvement, I don't merely mean thinking about it, but because we're not talking about a theoretical involvement, we're talking about something that's very practical. It's like a real everyday involvement, one where our livelihood, to a degree, is bound up with the thing we're working with. So, like he would say that it's the farmer or the fisherman. They're the ones who are deeply involved with creation and have the most insight into its beauty and how to care for it. Like, it's not the tourist, but the inhabitant that is best able to care for the place. Now, if you don't include Papa's reference to God, I mean, this definitely sounds a lot like what Heidegger and Wendell Berry write about. Wendell says kind use. Marty probably just says use, but it's genuine use. Next slide. It's about work. Underlying every form of work is a concept of the relationships which we can and must have with what is other than ourselves. Together with awe-filled contemplation of creation, which we find in St. Francis of Assisi, the Christian spiritual tradition has also developed a rich and balanced understanding of the meaning of work. So you may want to think about what job you want to have in the future, or what career you want to have, and if you don't know, maybe think about the ones that you don't want to have. At least that's probably a step in the right direction. And I think if you take the time to think deeply about a given career, I think you'll see what Pope Francis is actually trying to say here. I'll say more about it on the next slide. Or actually the slide after that. So move on. Next slide. Paragraph 126. Okay, we got Saint Benedict of Nursia. So yeah, this guy's a stud. He wrote a book known as The Rules of Saint... Well, it was probably just called The Rules, and then someone else titled it The Rules of Saint Benedict. And he set the standard for the combination of work, prayer, and study. So, to quote from Laudato Si, seeing manual labor as spiritually meaningful proved revolutionary. Personal growth and sanctification came to be sought in the interplay of recollection and work. This way of experiencing work makes us more protective and respectful of the environment. It imbues our relationship to the world with a healthy sobriety. Now, what St. Benedict started was huge. Papa speaks of it as being revolutionary, and I totally agree. And I think it is, or at least it should be, common sense, or common knowledge, rather, that physical activity is essential for health, especially healthy brain activity. Like if you don't exercise, if you just kind of sit in a chair all day, your brain is not going to work nearly as well as it could. And furthermore, it's like with things like ADHD and depression, I know that exercise is basically medication for it. With some cases, maybe not with the severe ones, severe cases, but with the more minor ones, you won't even need medication. It's just gonna, by exercising, it's like that is your medication. But with St. Benedict, I think he's talking about more than simply exercise. I mean, he's talking about work, and there's a difference. What do you think that difference would be? Well, work is exercise. No, exercise is just done kind of just for you. Work is a contribution to society. Or at least ideally it is. Okay, next slide. Once our capacity for contemplation and reverence is impaired, it becomes easy for the meaning of work to be misunderstood. Work should be the setting for this rich personal growth, where many aspects of life enter into play: creativity, planning for the future, developing our talents, living out our values, relating to others, and giving glory to God. Look, I know that some of the jobs you may have right now, or at least once you're allowed to go back to work, may not seem like the most meaningful things. It's like, it's hard for me to be excited about, when I was working at Dick's, it was hard for me to be excited about that. It's hard to be excited about jobs where you don't really feel like you're applying anything other than what anybody else could do. It's like there's very little amount of your personality and your special gifts that you can apply. And so this might be really, I think you might be at a more significant challenge to understand what he's saying here. But I can tell you, especially with the second point, I can tell you that, I mean, being a teacher really challenges me with regards to personal growth. It's like the last thing in the world I want to be is a hypocrite. Well, not the last thing. Sorry, that reminded me of this joke from Norm Macdonald. He says it in the episode of Comedians in a Car Getting Coffee. So he's with Jerry Seinfeld, and he brings up how somebody said to him, or they're talking about Bill Cosby. It's like, somebody said to him, the worst thing is the hypocrisy. Norm Macdonald goes, well, I don't think that's the worst thing. I think probably the raping is the worst thing. Then the drugging. Then the lying. And maybe a little bit further down the list would be hypocrisy. It's like, come to think of it, I think all rapists are probably hypocrites. You don't find any rapists that... it's just hilarious. I know I'm butchering it, so I just have to look it up. But one thing that I don't want to be is a hypocrite. Like, I don't really think I could live with myself if I came into class in front of you every day and said things that I did not believe. Or if I tried to teach you things that I didn't think were important. And of course I'm not a saint, and I screw up all the time. But if I'm trying to be better, then it makes it easier. So, I mean, being in front of you in the classroom definitely gives me some motivation to get my crap together. So like that, relating to others and living out our values and developing our talents. And applying our own creativity. And that's actually, that part's been a little difficult for me. Especially with the freshmen and sophomores. Just because I have to prepare for those classes like every day or the night before. And so I just have to rely solely on the book because I don't have time to do anything else. And I mean, I'll leave it with this. I know that if I'm going to be the best teacher that I can possibly be, it's going to require all of what Pope Francis says here. Bringing up, incorporating my creativity, planning for the future, developing my talents, living out my values, relating to others, and giving glory to God. It's going to take all of those. So I think he's really spot on with this. All right, next slide. So we were created with a vocation to work. The goal should not be that technological progress increasingly replace human work, for this would be detrimental to humanity. I think somebody brought up that question similar to that, but I can't find it. I'm not seeing it. But it brought up how now this is kind of it's an interesting issue. I think we're probably starting to see it a lot more lucidly than before, the quarantine thing. Because it's work can be a grind and stuff, but it gives a lot of meaning to your life. Not having a job is torture, I think. And yeah, like I don't, that kind of gets me on a little bit of a tangent. But I've never really understood like how it seems like so many people just are trying to get through the week to the weekend. And it's like, I mean, maybe just not so many people are lucky enough to have a job that they enjoy. I don't know. Not everyone's lucky enough to be in your presence. So yeah, I don't know. But this thing about replacing technological progress, replacing human work, we can go to the next slide because that's where I bring this up. So, yet the orientation of the economy has favored a kind of technological progress in which the costs of production are reduced by laying off workers and replacing them with machines. So Wendell Berry brings this up in The Unsettling of America, and he shows how it really happens in like the mid 1900s with greater and greater pushing of what he calls big technology. So like these humongous machines that are used for farming, and how it's almost as if the goal was to have as few people as possible farming, but then you have everyone who doesn't have a job anymore. They go to the city in search for work, and since there's not enough jobs for them, that leads to crime and a lot of other bad things. And I'm not saying that the solution is to simply get rid of all these tractors and everything should be like being done by hand or whatever. I'm not at all saying that, but what I am pointing out is that he's right that the orientation of the economy has favored a kind of technological progress in which the costs of production are reduced by laying off workers and replacing them with machines. It's like that's definitely the case. All right, we're gonna stop here because we don't have that many slides left. So I'm just gonna stop here, and I want you to finish reading chapter 3. Is it? Yeah, chapter 3. So you only have 6 paragraphs you'll have to read, or actually 7. So I'll post that homework on Google Classroom along with this lecture, and hope you have a glorious day. And oh, by the way, my webcam is supposed to be arriving sometime this week, so hopefully I'll be able to set up a Zoom thingy for us. I'll try to work out the details of that in the meantime. All right, so have a lovely night, and I'll post another lecture probably on Wednesday. See ya.